Why are there so few women in senior roles in a state agency? Today, I'm joined by Verona Frankish, who is the boss lady, CEO of YOPA Estate Agent, who is the seventh largest estate agency brand in the UK. Thanks for joining me today,
You're welcome.
Verona. Why are there so few senior women in senior roles in a state agency? Talk to me.
Okay, so I think there's a number of reasons, and it's not just about today's practices. So I think for me, there's three big challenges we have. The first one is legacy. In 20 years ago, 30 years ago, women weren't as emancipated as what they are today in business, in estate agency, in leadership, in many sectors. And therefore, they weren't encouraged necessarily to put themselves forward for promotions, for big roles. And there was much more an acceptance that women played the stay-at-home role and that men went and got the big jobs. So that legacy has meant that our bringing that ethos up from the grassroots of women hasn't helped today. So what that has then led us to, which is for me the second problem, is confidence. So we've been, I guess, conditioned to believe that that's where we should be, that we don't have either the ability or the scope within our home life or the work life to actually be successful in senior roles. And therefore we pause before putting ourselves forward for promotions or for the big jobs.
It's interesting. I've spoken to many women, and they, you get a job description where there's 10 bullet points, and the woman might have 8 or 9 of them, but because she's got 10, she won't apply. But if a bloke's got 7, okay, we'll have a go.
There's so many stats and data to support that, and it's similar to imposter syndrome. So I don't believe, or there's a lot of science to say that women or men don't feel imposter syndrome any differently, but they react differently.
Nearly every single person that sat on that sofa suffers from imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Okay. And the reason I know that is that when the cameras go off for about 3 or 4 minutes, people just really just go,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And even the hugest names in the industry that you put on a pedestal have got it. How do you deal with your imposter syndrome?
I've learned later on in my career, if I'm being totally honest, to train my brain, to train my mindset, to focus on the experiences that I've had, the proof points, the evidence. And I've also been very open to learning. I have never got to a point where I think I know it all, I've got it nailed, I'm really confident. So I'm really open to being vulnerable. And that helps me because I'm really happy to say, I don't know the answer to this, but over here, I absolutely do. I know we'll figure it out.
Well, I was going to ask you how you do that. You say by learning. Is it a case of just going online and just saying, and just typing stuff in and seeing what comes up?
So I listen to lots of podcasts. I listen to high performance podcasts. I listen to Stephen Bartlett. I read lots of books. So the Steve Peters book, The Chimp Paradox, one of my favorites. And when you understand the science of the brain and when you understand that we are in control, and just because your brain thinks a thought does not make it true, and you have to train your chimp, as Steve Peters refers to it, then you realize that you're taking the power for your life, your actions, your future back into your own hands. If you let imposter syndrome take over you, and if you let those vulnerabilities take over, you'll never move forward. You'll never allow yourself to fail. And failure is essential. It's absolutely essential. But fail fast and don't fail on the same thing twice.
And don't dwell.
Yeah, exactly. Move on.
Yeah, how many times do we have to learn the same lesson?
Absolutely.
So many people fall into that one.
Yeah.
You said second was confidence. What was the third?
The third one is, as a consequence of those two things, representation. So today, even with what I've just described, we have not got enough female women in senior positions in leadership in a state agency, and not just a state agency, by the way, in leadership generally. There's lots of stats about the FTSE 500, and I think it's 4 or 5% of the CEOs are women, and that's because of what I've just described. We have a legacy where it's never an accepted practice to promote or support or encourage women to move up the ladder. confidence has meant that they hold themselves back, and therefore we don't have the representation. So when I'm hiring, for example, I was hiring for a couple of key roles last year, and I spoke to recruitment agents, and the CVs that I was getting was 80 to 90% male, and I was challenging them. I would like more diversity on these CVs. The problem is they know that that's what I want, but there isn't enough people who are able to demonstrate the skill set, the experience that I wanted into those roles, because we just haven't got the representation. So it is a challenge, but it's one that we have to work on together. And in terms of working on that, I think the first thing is we have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge it in the workplace, but we also have to acknowledge it in our home lives. So the men who are defaulting to their wives taking the core role at home they've got to have the discussion around that. And I generalize, and I'm not saying that every household or every work environment is the same, but we know statistically there is still a lot of work to do. We've got to improve the gender pay gap. That is still massively evident in the sector. And, you know, people like Ellie Rees and Nicola Burman are doing a lot of work on highlighting that and working towards activities and actions and tactics that we can take to improve that.
What about the Women in Estate Agency group and other such resources?
So Women in Estate Agency was founded during COVID by Leanna Laporta-Brown and Claire Hughes. And the purpose of that really was, in its simplest form, was a safe space for women to talk, for women to get support for each other. And they thought maybe 200 women will kind of join the group. Today, we're up to almost 3,000 members in that group. And as you know, we had our first conference in March of this year. And that was a phenomenal event, very unusual, and the coming together of not only women, but a lot of men who understood the need for change and who are advocates for change. And that group there's a Facebook group, which is incredibly active, which still remains a safe space. And it's a safe space because people can talk about, they can share their successes, they can encourage each other. And I talk about imposter syndrome and having confidence. I see on a daily basis that there are people doing a phenomenal job in that group, but still questioning themselves and still needing some reassurance. And what's brilliant is inevitably there is a tirade of support for those people to say, you know, you're absolutely right, that's the right thing to do, or here's a build on that, this is what I would do differently. So that Facebook group has been brilliant. But then maximizing then from the conference, we now need to, and we've met not that long ago as a committee. I now chair that committee, and we've agreed that we're going to do some more work on an ongoing basis. We'll have another conference next year, but we're hoping to put in a webinar series which will be dealing with some of the more fundamental topics, some of which we touched on at the conference, but some which are around imposter syndrome or building confidence or menopause, whatever the issues are. They're very not only specific to women, but certainly prevalent in the community of women.
Thank you for your time today.